Okay, so this is going to be the last video on Chapter 2. We're going to cover Section 2.3, which is going to confront some of the objections to the economic approach, some of the things that we've been raising, some of the issues. There are some arguments against the way economics frames things. So let's take a look. Our learning outcomes, we're going to analyze arguments against the economic approach to decision making. We're going to interpret a trade-off diagram and contrast normative and positive statements. So what are we talking about with objections? What does that mean? Well, there are two main objections. The first one is that people, firms, and societies do not always act as economists suggest that they should. We saw that earlier. We said, there is, in the introduction section, we talked about, should you go to college? And economically, yeah, you should, because a bachelor's degree is going to give you 67% higher income than a high school degree. A master's is going to give you twice as much income as a high school degree on average, based on the BLS data from 2020, right? An economist would look at that and say, that is clear evidence that everyone should go to college and specialize in a skill set like that because they're going to be better off. And that's going to be good for society. But not everybody does that. Not everybody makes that decision. There are other factors at play. So we don't always act as economists suggest that we should. We just don't. And the second point is, even if we did, some people might argue that people, firms, and societies should not act according to these economic models. So we're going to take a look at both of these viewpoints to examine their validity. So the first major objection: people just don't act the way that economic models assume. The key claim here is that economic decision-making seems to require more information and rationality than individuals typically possess. So, for example, are you really going out there into the world and calculating a budget constraint before you go shopping for your weekly groceries? Do you think about how many apples can I buy, how many loaves of bread, how many cartons of eggs, or do you just go out and buy those things and hope you don't run out of money? Do governments explicitly use the production possibilities frontier when they're making their decisions about budgets? The reality is people act based on their experience and based on practice, and they're not always rational. So this raises a valid concern. Do economic models really reflect real-world behavior? If we are saying that they don't because people are irrational, then does that undermine all of economics? Does that undermine what we're doing here if it doesn't reflect reality? Well, there's a counterpoint to this objection. The counterpoint is that while individuals and societies might not explicitly use economic models, we might not explicitly do our budget constraints and do our PPF curves when we make these decisions, the tools, these concepts, these economic models can still provide valuable insights into the trade-offs and choices. So, for example, shoppers will intuitively maximize their utility based on whatever their experience is. Even if they don't explicitly go through and do all the calculations, they're still trying to get the best deal they can. They're still trying to fill up their buggy with as much stuff as they can of value to them. They're trying to maximize value. That's just something that we do as consumers. Governments are also going to feel pressure from the voters to push their decisions to align with society's preferences. If the voters are saying, we need more money in education, we need more money in schools, it's unacceptable that schools are having to shut down, these grades are unacceptable, the government's going to listen. And preferably, if in a good government situation, they're going to take corrective actions, which means putting more of their resources into the issues that are pain points for society. So the economic models just really serve as useful approximations for analyzing behavior. It's a reasonable starting point to analyzing behavior with tools of economic analysis, but it's not going to solve any problems in a real world fashion necessarily. It just gives us a good starting point. It's not about documenting reality. It's about giving us tools to analyze reality. Now, to address some of the complexity of real-world decision-making, there is a field of economics called behavioral economics. So this field studies deviations from traditional economic rationality. It looks at factors like habits, biases, social preferences, and things like that that influence decisions. So while traditional models might help to simplify reality, they still capture the core elements of scarcity and trade-offs and efficiency, and they can be used as a foundation for more complex analysis like the behavioral economics, which is going to borrow from other fields, from other social sciences to get a little bit better, broader picture. We're not really interested in capturing perfectly capturing individual decision making. We're just trying to get down to having some tools to broadly analyze behavior. So now let's consider the second major objection, which is that people should not act according to economic models. The key claim here is that economic behavior emphasizes self-interest, which some argue is actually morally problematic. We can't all be selfish assholes, right? There's a moral problem attached to that. So it's important here to understand that economics is not a form of moral instruction. We're not trying to we do want to make the most just society in the sense that, by creating, by using resources efficiently, by not wasting anything, we can bring people out of poverty, those kind of things. There's enough to go around to at least everybody should live, without going hungry. So there's some morality there, but it's not really a form of moral instruction. Rather, it seeks to describe economic behavior as closely as possible to the way it actually exists. This economic approach is rooted in positive statements, which basically say, we're describing the world as it is, and these statements are factual and they can be tested. We try to avoid normative statements, which basically describes the world how it should be and are considered subjective questions of opinion. So if the critique is, people should not act as economics says, we're not really interested in how people should or should not do things. We're interested in the world as it is, in the positive statements. So we can kind of rely on Adam Smith for some of this. He's one of the guys that we talked about in the first chapter. And Smith's view is that humans are both selfish assholes, they're self-interested, and they're altruistic. So we're complex. He said that how selfish soever man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others. So economic models might simplify reality, but they also acknowledge that there are broader motivations. Economics recognizes that human behavior is going to be complex and multidimensional. And then so here's another important idea. Being a selfish asshole, like having self-interest, is actually kind of, in the context of economic decisions, that's an expression of personal choice. That's freedom. That's economic freedom. So economic decisions do reflect personal priorities, like choosing between, a high-paying job versus a fulfilling career, or deciding you want more leisure time versus focusing on your career again. The economics allows individuals to make personal economic choices, and it respects their autonomy to do so. We're not here to force anybody to do anything. We might say that economically going to college is the better decision than most other decisions in terms of your expected income, but we're not trying to force anybody to do it. We're just trying to put out data and leave that where it is. Okay. Now, it's also interesting to note the potential positive social outcomes of this self-interest. The idea is captured by the concept of the invisible hand, which was again phrased by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations. So the concept here is that individual self-interested behavior can lead to positive social outcomes for others. For example, entrepreneurs innovate in order to maximize profits. Those profits in turn benefit consumers, or rather, let's say the profit benefits the owners, but the innovation benefits consumers because they're getting better products. So Yes, we're motivated by profit. We're motivated because we want to be rich. We want to have all the money beyond our wildest dreams, which then leads us to, well, how do we do that? Let's innovate. Let's disrupt. Let's change an industry. Let's put out a product that nobody's ever seen before that's going to rock your socks off. And that product then is going to yield greater benefits for society if it really does solve a lot of customers' problems. And so that's kind of the idea. So a broader social good can emerge from selfish individual actions. So it's important to remember that self-interest in economics does not imply self-interest in all aspects of life. It doesn't necessarily imply any major moral issues so much as it's focused on society as a whole. We're not worried about each individual person's morality and what guides them. So lastly, it's just important to remember human behavior is multidimensional. We see self-interest in economic decisions like negotiating salaries, but we also see, like Adam Smith said, altruism in other areas like volunteering or charitable donations. So to reiterate, economics starts with the concept of self-interest, but it recognizes there are broader motivations that also affect our choices. Therefore, the criticisms that economic models are too simplistic or that they emphasize self-interest too much, they don't really invalidate their usefulness. Instead, it's important to understand that both the strengths and the limitations of the economic approach to understanding human behavior. There are other fields, there are other disciplines, and it's important to have a wide variety of education when you think about something as complex as human behavior. All right, that's going to close us out for chapter 2. So yeah, I think that's been a good one that covers scarcity. If you have any questions, reach out to me. But yeah, that's going to end us for this one. So I will see you all when we start with the videos on chapter 3. Thank you all.